Hello, everyone, and I'm so thrilled to have and to welcome back to the show for her second interview, Professor Nicoleta Paraschivescu. Nicoleta, welcome back to the show. I'm so thrilled to talk about your new translation of your book, The Partimenti of Giovanni Paisiello. We are in Partimento heaven, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a great episode. I think everyone is thrilled for this interview. Nicoleta, welcome to the show.
Nikhil, thank you very much for having me back in your show, and I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very, very happy to have you back. We had such a good time in the last episode, and this time I'm really thrilled because I think this is, so you had a wonderful book, but it was in German, right? Is that right? So the book was published. It was a fantastic book, but the only problem was for English speakers, this book was not available because it was not translated. It was sitting as a fantastic book, but in German. So now we actually have a English translation by Chris Walton, and it's now available. Is it already available for sale?
Yes, it was actually since September last year. It's available. Yeah, and it was published in the Rochester University Press.
Wonderful, exactly. September 13, and this is a very fresh new book that we can, for Partimento. Whenever a book is published with the word Partimento in it, I mean, everyone should be excited. so rare that these things happen. Of course, now with greater frequency. And I'm so thrilled to be able to talk about this book. We talked a little bit, I think we touched on it just a little bit, right, in the last interview. We talked greatly about Paisiello, but now we can really dive in deep and really get people excited about the book, talk about the book in a general sense so that they can go out and then buy the book. So I think we have prepared, and you have prepared so much for this interview, and I think I'm very excited. Let's go step by step and take this section by section. So I think the very first thing we should talk about is perhaps the book itself. I mean, we talked about I think, how about this? Let's talk about that beautiful cover. That cover is something else, isn't it? So it's very eye-catching. And could you just discuss, how did you pick this picture?
Yes, actually, I simply love paintings, and I have different folders. When I see something, I always take screenshots, and I have a folder for Naples, one for Venice, one for Rome, one for Natura Morta, this Vanitas, kind of 16th, 17th century. So this one is actually by a Dutch painter, Van Vitelli. And when I visited my good friend in Naples, Enrico Baiano, he lives exactly close to the Piazza Van Vitelli. His name is Van Vittel. He's from close to Utrecht, Dutch painter, and he moved to Italy in the 17th, 18th century. And there is then a whole dynasty also, his sons painted. But this is a painting by Gasparo Van Vitelli of the Naples Bay. You can see the Vesuvio and Castel dell'Uovo, I think, is there. And yeah, it's a very beautiful painting, which I like. And I like the colors.
Yeah, it's very eye-catching. And it's not always the case that a book is going to have such a beautiful cover. I know there's a lot of... Looks great. Now, is it available only in hardcover? Is that what it... Or
I think so, electronically. You have to check on the page of Rochester University Press, but as far as I know, it's also electronically available.
Great. We'll put the link in the description for people to look at the different options. Now, I think we should actually ask the question, why a book about Paisiello's Partimenti? I mean, why should we actually have a book about this subject?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, Paisiello was one of the most famous composers of his time. And I don't know if you know, there is a letter of Mozart where he writes, "I have to rush." It was 1784. Paisiello just returned from Russia, going to Naples, and stayed a couple of months in Vienna at the court. And Mozart was so keen to meet him. He was a star. He was a very sought after composer. And when you look at the slide which I prepared next, you can see he served three emperors, which is quite unusual. I mean, he was at Catherine the Great's court, Catherine the Great, and Napoleon Bonaparte, and of course Ferdinand IV in Naples. So he was a star. He was also a very good businessman. We have quite a lot of letters from him, which we didn't, I mean, part of them we know, but I think there is much more information which could come, which could be very interesting for researchers and to have more about his life. So he kept all his connections warm. And the interesting thing is that there were a lot of publications about his operas. He was mainly an opera composer, and but there was also a quite recent thesis about his keyboard works, which I will talk about immediately, but nothing about his partimenti. So interestingly, we have quite some partimenti and we know a lot, but nothing was published. So I took this opportunity and did it as my doctoral thesis in the Doc Artes program in Ghent and Leiden. Yeah, of
It's
business.
it's interesting you mentioned Mozart because I believe in his letters he was always, I think he was really trying his hardest in his career to get a good position. He didn't have a good experience with what was it, the archbishop or somebody who quite literally kicked him in the seat of his pants. And unfortunately, he would have loved, right, to have these sorts of positions. I mean, Napoleon, Catherine the Great, these monarchs. I mean, those are truly, if you can get that kind of position, I mean, you're set
Yes,
for life as a composer in that period, right?
Mozart was maybe one step more refined. He was able to compose, to catch the taste and the demands of the boss, which would give him um, yeah, which would ask to compose for him. Mozart was very good in deciding what his um, Auftraggeber, I don't know the English word, his the nobleman who would pay him for his work would demand from him. Paisiello was quite stable in his taste and way of composing. I mean, in his operas, often we hear some kind of repetitions, and he was a very clever melodic composer. His melodies were partially extremely beautiful. One opera, quite late, Nina Ossia La Pazza per Amore, was so famous at the time that there are paintings where women faint. The melodies are so beautiful that the public is so touched that women would faint during the performance. So it's all kind of part of his fame and reputation. But there are also critics who say that he repeats quite a lot his many formulas, and that's also true. In some pieces, we hear Paisiello repeating himself a bit too much.
Right, right. I understand. Okay, so let's continue. There's a lady uh, we should talk about, the Grand Duchess. Can you talk about this lady? Well, there's actually two. I guess her name originally is Sophia Maria Dorothea. Let's see. Let's bring it over the
Of
slide here.
Württemberg, yes.
Yes.
She's
Who is
actually
she
a
and what?
German
Okay.
noblewoman who married the son of Catherine the Great. And she became the daughter-in-law of Catherine the Great. And she actually, Paisiello, there is a letter by Galliani where he describes Paisiello had, it's here in my book. I just have to see where. Yeah, anyway, I can just explain. He, as soon as he reached Russia, he was extremely successful. Also, in this case, Catherine the Great, for example, it's known she didn't like long recitatives. She said, I like arias, but not long text, which no
Yeah.
one understands in Italian. So he was able to cut down the recitatives, and the operas were shorter than usually. But it's in that letter. It says that Maria Fyodorovna took him immediately as her teacher, and it's very much possible that she was already very well educated from Württemberg, from Germany. She had a basic education.
Right. And can you
So,
talk? Oh, go ahead.
yes, the reason why I show her is because the Partimenti, which we have by Paisiello, this I show you a copy of the print from 1782. I mean, the next picture you can see maybe
Okay.
on the point is the
Is that
title.
that's not the I think is it the because we have this Raccolta, but
Yeah,
that's okay.
exactly. That's something else. So this is two things he composed in Russia
Okay.
after he became the teacher of Maria Fyodorovna. He composed 1782. He printed the Regole, which we will see after, and 1783 he composed the Raccolta di vari capricci e rondo. So this is a collection of keyboard pieces with violin accompaniment.
Oh, okay.
So these two things give us an impression, or we have we can see very well what was usual. Exactly, this piece, La Partenza, the farewell, this was played in 1783 in Russia at the court, and at the same time, 1782, we have one of the first prints ever of a Partimento book. It's
Is
this
it
one by Paisiello,
is it
Regole
this
per
one?
bene
Ah,
accompagnare il Partimento,
okay.
1782. So these two pieces, these two sources are quite interesting for my book and for the environment in which the Partimenti were composed. I will play a few bars from the Partenza,
Okay. That's
from the Canzona, exactly.
okay. Beautiful. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I really don't know if it's because she left, his pupil, Maria Fyodorovna, left for a travel with her husband in Europe. And Paisiello writes in a letter, and this is one of the very few notices which we have about him as a teacher, Paisiello as a teacher. He writes the following to his friend Abbe Ferdinando Galliani. I cannot fail to mention that Her Imperial Highness has done me great honor with the progress she has made in music since I have had the privilege of giving her lessons. She has promised to practice whenever possible during her journey, and I hope she will indeed do that. And then she writes, in the same letter, she writes that she's traveling with the Tsar Paul I, with her husband. So they hope he hopes that they can attend some operas in Naples. And he
Wow.
writes the following: They are both the greatest lovers of fine arts, so I hope that the two of them will be satisfied in our homeland, Naples. They will surely find a way to enjoy themselves. I don't know if they will be in Naples during the theater season, but if possible, I should like them to see our Socrate and how things are performed in Naples, since they especially like the opera buffa.
Mm.
This is very, very nice testimony of his relationship also to his pupil, which
That's
was
like,
very
I mean, that's like knowing the president, right, of the country. It's like just having like just and getting
lesson.
close to the family of like the king or the queen. So that's very, very high up. Um, okay, so he teaching from this book. So this book, was it published for people to buy, or was it just a private manuscript?
Exactly. So if you continue with the pictures.
Okay, so we'll start here. So this is the rules, and then let's scroll down, I guess, to the next page.
Exactly. Here you can stop. This is the autograph
Okay.
of this is quite a big luck for us to have both a print and an autograph. Usually, in the best case, we have a manuscript. In the better case, we have an autograph from Paisiello himself, but we have both in this case. And I could also trace the mistakes of the printing.
Ah,
Although Paisiello was very, I'm sure he took a lot of care
mm,
with printing. It's because it was a military printing manufactory. But of course, we see, looking at this manuscript, and I will talk about this, about the print, I will talk, we can see two things. One is the very close tradition or very close connection of Paisiello to Durante. That's
mm,
one. Durante was 1 year before he died. Paisiello joined Sant'Onofrio Conservatory, and Durante was his teacher.
right.
So um, this connection I will show a bit in another manuscript between Paisiello and Durante. And the second thing we can see,
Should we
yeah,
should we go to a partimento from the book? So maybe we'll just
that's the next exactly.
okay.
We have Partimento, which we have in different ways. This is from the book of 1782, and it's very actually very. I play a few bars. Now comes the Romanesca inversion. And so on. So what we see
Fantastic, fantastic.
we see kind of dialogue between a baseline which is moved, a bit more moved, and a baseline which is static and takes over ideas from the previous. When you see in the second bar, for example, you have this movement of eights. You can take it in the bars where the bass is static and
Yes.
invert it.
Right. Right.
What I want to say is that the regole are very demanding. And this was one point. The regole are not easy. The first examples of partimenti. So
Mm.
we have a third, just rules, which are similar with Durante
Yep.
in their concept and so on. But then comes a few partimenti without numbers, and then some which are not difficult, but then they are really demanding. So your question was if they played these things. I could imagine that his pupil Maria Fyodorovna, she was able to play quite well.
Mm.
I don't know how many, because, for example, he composed a concerto in C major for a lady in waiting, and that's completely a different level. And if we look at the Raccolta and Partenza, there are many pieces which are very simple.
Mm.
So my point, and the most important point, is the question: what happens in this gap? We have simple music which is accessible to people who have no education, no possibility, or who have not the skills to play difficult music. They
Right.
still can play it. But people who are musicians who are able to get a good education and to play what they look at, they can ornament, improvise, and compose and do something also with the simple pieces if they know to play partimento.
Right. That's brilliant. And I think on the next slide we have a new individual. His name is Talleyrand. I think we should talk
Exactly.
talk a little bit about him. And he also was a student of Paisiello.
Exactly. So Paisiello, as I said before, returned 1784 at the court of Ferdinand IV in Naples. You can imagine, living in Russia as a Neapolitan was quite hard. I mean,
Very cold.
yes,
No
very,
Italian food.
yeah, and all the Neapolitans whom I know, they just love Naples, and I can understand it fully. I mean, it's the most beautiful place, and we know that Paisiello was really longing for
Mm.
coming back. So finally, he got a job, and in Naples, he became maestro di capella. So he returned and started to compose a lot, and of
Isn't that
course.
isn't that amazing? It's like so long. Like you can just say goodbye to the president of a country and say, I miss my. You have most musicians, if they get a a nice position, they're not going anywhere. They're just gonna stay there. And he has such a reputation that he can just choose his job. He can go wherever he wants. And that's real clout. That's real
Not only that, he took a break
stature.
of yes, he took a break of half of year in Vienna, as I said before, and at the court, Joseph II, he composed 12 symphonies for him for the king in Vienna, which are unfortunately lost. It's
Oh,
20 years that I search for them. They must be amazing. These 12 symphonies.
gone forever.
They are lost. No one
Ooh,
could find them. It's known that he composed them for him. So he was at the court in Vienna half of year before he returned to Naples. So
incredible.
yes,
Wow.
and Talleyrand is a very known name in France. It's a very important dynasty of politicians,
Mm.
clericals, and noble people. So his father was Auguste-Louis' father was an ambassador in Naples, and his mother wanted singing lessons, of course, from Paisiello, which he didn't really like to offer so much. It seems there is an anecdote by Ferrari where he says that he hated teaching. He didn't like because he was so busy probably with other things. Godifredo Ferrari, I mean, he likes anecdote. One must be careful when he reads, but he writes about the mother of Auguste-Louis Talleyrand. At the beginning of the year, the new French ambassador came to Naples with his family, Baron Talleyrand, whose wife played the pianoforte very well. She was also a singer. She had already been seduced by the music of Paisiello and paid him many tributes and compliments until he agreed to give her singing lessons, though the composer loathed doing so. It did not take long for him to become the idol of the family, and he was to be found almost solely in the French embassy. In the mornings, he gave lessons to the Baroness, who had arranged for an apartment to be prepared for him so that he could study and compose his music there.
Mm.
And later, Ferrari writes about himself. I had Paisiello, who from time to time corrected my arias, duets, and concertante pieces that I had already written. I also went to all his rehearsals for his new works, and after the third evening, I took over the position of maestro al cembalo in order to practice. So the first 3 days, Paisiello would conduct, and then he would give to Ferrari the leading. And he was very happy to let me do so, as it meant he could go to bed and sleep.
You could have an
So,
earlier night. Now, I have to ask you, Nicoleta, was Paisiello like a virtuoso on the keyboard? I know Durante was known to be a virtuoso, right? Was
yeah,
Paisiello kind of a very skilled keyboard player?
yes, I'm sure he was. I'm sure, but at the same time, that was just a part of his capacities. I
Mm.
mean, he was a composer. The main thing was to be a composer. You had to live on something.
Yep.
That's why 9 years. Paisiello was 9 years. Like most of the children entered with 10 or a bit earlier or later, and stayed 10 years in the conservatories. Paisiello
Mm.
finished after 9 years. So his goal was to become a good composer. He
Okay.
was playing very well. There are some passages I found where it's descripted that he played, but he was not a virtuoso like Mozart to go and play in front of people.
Okay.
He was a composer. That
Oh,
was the highest you could be.
okay. So that was like he was focused on composition as his primary expression, essentially.
And the most, it was the best business you could have. I mean, yeah.
Right, right. Very good. And let's tally around here. There's another slide here about an
Exactly.
inscription inside the manuscript. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes. Now, if you maybe move to the next slide, you can see a manuscript, which is, if you look at the baseline, it's the same beginning like which I played before.
Mm,
And this is a disposizione a due. There are two books so thick, over 600 pages, with disposizioni on Partimenti by Paisiello. They are in Paris. They are accessible online on Gallica. And what are disposizioni? So partimenti is clear. Our baselines, a partimento is basically a thread, a potential piece of music, like Giorgio Sanguinetti says in his book. So we have a thread and we can compose a piece or improvise a piece over this thread. Now, to use the same baseline to train somebody as a composer is a different level. So somebody had lessons probably with or tried to do disposizioni. In a disposition, if you look at the next slide,
okay, so
you
let's.
you
I think it's this one.
yes, you see the same bass line from up, the third line, and you see two staves over it. So this is a disposizione a tre. You have three separate voices. This training was done in order to teach composers to write for strings, for example, for
Mm,
a quartet, or to write in voices and not for keyboard playing. But the most important thing is to have a partimento has to be designed like that to be able to use it as a disposizione. You cannot take any bass and use it as a disposition. So this is very important. In this manuscript, we have a lot of examples from the print from 1782, plus another 41 new Partimenti by Paisiello.
And
So
that's the second book that you discovered by chance, right?
exactly. And that is the main point. We have the name Talleyrand inside of the second manuscript. And I could imagine exactly that somebody copied it maybe for Talleyrand. I don't think that it was his handwriting, but or it was done very fast. These were exercises because we know Talleyrand, Auguste Talleyrand became later ambassador himself, but he really thought of becoming a composer.
Wow.
And he kept the contact. We have letters from him with Paisiello. So this, yeah, it's very possible that it was from his circle and
Now,
from
those
his.
you mentioned the tons of pages of the dispositions. Are they in Talleyrand's hand or Paisiello's hand? Are there corrections? Is it what's the quality of the dispositions? Are they like master level that people should copy, or what do you say?
No, they are, in my opinion, they are basic exercises. There is not no handwriting. We have a few words in this manuscript, but they are not by Paisiello nor by Talleyrand, because
Hmm.
we have one exercise book in Paris in the library by Talleyrand's mother and son, probably, and there is no. It's not Talleyrand's hand, I think. I could rather imagine that these baselines were used by somebody to, and they are written quite fast. It's not a good handwriting. It's also not very high level. But if you think that over one base you have up to 7 examples of dispositions, it's just to make a fast writing somehow.
Hmm.
It's a way of exercising, because variation and was very important in when you once dealt with solfeggi, partimenti, changing. You can see that in many aspects of teaching, changing, practicing, changing again, practicing again. I mean, singers in Naples like Farinelli. I speak about the singers in the beginning. There are lots of letters and testimonies that they would repeat an aria in a different way.
Hmm.
So there is variation was part of it, and like these exercises, they are not very high level, but they are. You can see how somebody tries to change and starts exercising to compose.
Now, did Paisiello, you mentioned solfeggi, and I know you just mentioned of his Regule. Did he teach singing? Did he use the solfeggio that they used at the Neapolitan conservatories to teach his students? Did he teach that sort of hexachordal solfeggio? And do we have collections of Paisiello's solfeggi?
We have one single collection of solfeggio which is attributed to Paisiello. But most of the examples were found thanks to Peter Van Toor's database of solfeggi and partimenti. They are by La Barbiera. There was a famous singing teacher,
Hmm.
Barbiera, which probably, I'm not sure that they are by Paisiello, and we don't know how he taught singing. I could rather imagine that if he had such an exclusive pupil like the Baroness Talleyrand, she would want to sing arias, and he would teach her how to change. It's a quite a difference, Nikhil, if you think of somebody who can pay, somebody who and have lessons. Yeah,
Yeah.
most of these boys, they had a really tough life in the
Hmm.
conservatory.
Yes.
They learned a skill.
Yeah.
So one thing is to learn a skill really hard, then you have a lot of exercises and
Hmm.
repetition. And another thing is to have some singing lessons from a composer. I think it was quite a difference.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just bring up this slide about the sources. I think this is very interesting.
Yeah,
Do you want to just talk about the sources?
exactly. I just showed here the Regole, and we have only 5 prints, which I showed you before. From this is a photocopy of one source, and there is so we have London, Paris, Chicago, St. Petersburg with manuscript additions, and Moscow. These are only 5 copies from the print, and then manuscript copies. We have the autograph and one which is not really Paisiello, and the copy of the Regole in Bologna. But I missed. I mean, in the book, I show, of course, the sources of the disposizioni, which are also online, and you can see them on Gallica, and of course the solfeggi, which are it's in the US
Great,
library in Chicago.
great.
Yeah, so all what we have by Paisiello.
And that's not a lot if you think about it. That's really not that much.
Still, I mean, if you see, we have 46 and 80, so of another 41, we have over 80 partimenti of
Yeah,
very high quality
yeah, that's
by
good.
Paisiello. That's great.
Yeah.
And then the solfeggi are very interesting, of course, but we are not sure that the ones which are not by La Barbiera are by Paisiello.
Hmm.
Still, I will talk also about it because partimenti were very closely related to solfeggi. I will show an example from the Vesela manuscript, and very closely related to disposizioni, and they were like a unity somehow.
Right, right. Now, I think we should take a little step back and let's actually, because I'm actually very curious about Paisiello and how he was formed. And it's very interesting because he was really formed, of course, as we know, in the Naples conservatories. And I think we should talk about his teacher, Francesco Durante, who is really, I think, probably a big source of inspiration for him and probably that lineage. But before we do that, I think there's a very beautiful painting here that we should talk about that maybe can set the tone, right, for the next section, so to speak. So let's look at this painting by Antonio Joli. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes, I mean, I chose it just to open a bit the scene because many people always think in the 18th century Rome was the capital, but it's not true. Was 4 times bigger than Rome at this
Wow.
time. Pisello lived. It had over 500 churches, many theaters, many
Wow.
private theaters. So it was such an incredible place to have a musical life, and it had the 4 conservatories. I mean, this is one procession. They had lots of processions also and feasts where they used also, of course, the pupils of the conservatories. They were singing in choirs and performing for all these church feasts. But if you imagine 500 churches, and it's quite an amazing place. Must have been at that time.
Wow. It must have been incredible, incredible music, incredible churches. And also we should you mentioned the 4 conservatories. Here they are. You want to just mention them?
Exactly, Santa Maria di Loreto, Sant'Onofrio, Pietà dei Turchini, and Poveri di Gesù Cristo. And the interesting thing is, Durante was very appreciated. He was primo maestro in 3 of these 4 conservatories at that
At the
time.
same time?
Yes, not at the same.
Oh,
Yeah, in
okay.
some at the same time, because towards the mid of the century, some closed down or started to close down. At the end, it became only one
Yes.
college. But he was actually, there was a time when he, or not simultaneously, he taught in all the 3 conservatories. And Paisiello came from Taranto, or close by Taranto, and he had his last year in Sant'Onofrio with Francesco Durante. You can show the next slide.
And let's talk about the man himself. Here he is.
Exactly. So why do I bring him? Because the beginning of, I mentioned in one of my chapters, Book of Regole by Durante, which is very practical and is part of a private collection in Paris of Christophe Rousset, the harpsichordist and conductor. And he was so kind to send me pictures of this manuscript. And it's the oldest manuscript of Durante, which is dated, and the
Hmm.
only one which we have during his lifetime, 1754.
Oh,
So
like near the end of his life, basically.
exactly, he died 55. So um, one priest, De Santi, Giustino de Santi. I found out he lived in the a bit mid of Italy. He was wealthy, from a wealthy family, and from Castelli, close to in the Abruzzo, in the mountains. And he went to Naples. And if you show the next slide,
The next
with
slide, I think is, let's see. I think it's
yes,
the right.
so Giustino de Santi, sacerdote means priest, Giustino de Santi,
Hmm.
came to Naples in April 1754, and he copied these 12 folios in very clear and tiny writing. Means he was quite keen on having all information there. And he says, yeah, he has the lessons from the rinomatissimo contrapuntista Francesco Durante. So these are the rules of Francesco Durante. Well, this manuscript is very important because for players, especially, it has a tuning instruction, how to tune the harpsichord in the beginning,
Hmm.
lots of basic instructions, and then comes one part with rules. If you look at the
Is it this
next,
one?
where he
Okay.
starts with the octave, rule of the octave with fingerings, which I don't know any other example as of now, where you have really the right hand in chords and fingerings. And by the way, you can see this scale up and down at the end of the second line. That's also fingerings for the right and left hand. So he was very keen on taking his knowledge back to Castelli.
Hmm.
We know some things about him. He spent some years in Venice before 1750. He was an organist at the cathedral in Castelli, and he was in Naples in the last year of Francesco Durante's life. Definitely not in the conservatories, but he had this source which we know it's by Durante.
Can
Now,
we sorry, Nicoleta, I just wanted to ask you a quick question just regarding
yes,
Durante himself, because he's such a huge figure, but I actually don't really know much about him. Like I read an anecdote where he drank some wine after a concert. I only I know that he was a fantastic keyboard player. I only know that he liked Antonio Sacchini as one of his students. He thought he would be like the next big thing, and he was in some senses. But what's his relationship with Paisiello? Do we have any anecdotes about that, or his relationship, or anything? Do you want to just share anything we know about Durante that might be interesting?
he was very much appreciated by Rousseau. Writes in his dictionary that he's the greatest counterpoint master of the world. He must have been very much appreciated as a teacher. We just know also from other sources that he didn't succeed as an opera composer, which opera composer again was the
Hmm.
highest he could achieve. But he composed a lot of church music and a lot of partimenti. Most partimenti, I mean, imagine um, 12, 13 years ago, we knew about, I don't know, 12, 13 sources of partimenti. Now, thanks to the database, we have 40 sources of his partimenti. So
Hmm.
many copies were done.
Right.
What is very interesting, and I wait that I heard in a conference that some research is done now about his private students. It seems he had lots of private lessons, and you can trace them by the payment bills of different families. So if more knowledge comes with that, that will be an achievement. But I didn't. I mean, I was always interested in his teaching more than something else.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he was very much appreciated as a teacher. That's clear. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's now continue into his I guess I see you shared Paisiello's Regole here as a comparison,
Because,
perhaps.
yes, he starts exactly the same with the rule of the octave, what we saw before. First describing, also some things are a bit different in the harmonies, but it's more or less the same. Also, they show first he describes in words and puts the chords. That's also what Durante does. But of course, in that source, we have also the right hand written out, which is not the case in Paisiello. Now, when you go to the next page, is something interesting. Again, then he shows, if you see the first line, again the same, but as chords, the rule of the octave in chords, and underneath as a motto del basso. He says, okay, you can do it as harmony, but you can also do it as motto del basso. So if you go up, and if you go down, it's 7, and so on. So 7, 6. Going up, it's 5, 6. So it shows these two possibilities. And now if you go to the next slide, it's the same. You see up the rule of the octave as harmonies, and underneath you see the same 5, 6, 5,
Right.
6.
Right.
Now, if we look at this regole, so what is important when we play partimenti? That's why I show this introduction. It's to know both harmony as well as the counterpoint way, the moti del basso. So one thing, if you go to the next slide, exactly, these are cadences. Also in Durante, you have the cadences. You can move on. The first 8 rules in Durante are cadences. Also, Paisiello talks a lot about cadences. And now I show you something which I think it's very important that so it's the same way of thinking. We learn the harmonies and at the same time the counterpoint value. And there is one example in Durante, because I use Durante a lot as a model for Paisiello, where he shows this is the end of it's like a hexachord going down. So it's 5, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, but with a very beautiful leap from the 6 to the 3 of the next chord. And I would like to play this example in
Okay.
because if you have the leap, if you have no place between the hands to do it down, you have to have the leap from up. And that's a melodic line which is very nice. So you do the leap either as an inner voice or as an upper voice from up to down. And it's
Gorgeous.
not just,
Mm.
it's a counterpoint with the inner voice. So that's one example of what is important when we play partimenti, to search, or when we ornament or do variations, to search inner voices or search answers to some movements which were given in the bass line.
And then are they both important, equally important? You must know the harmony and then you also know the counterpoint version. Do they work together?
Yes, the advantage of harmony is especially the rule of the octave. It's something very physical. It goes in the hand. You know, it's a Matheson calls it a Handsache. It's
Hmm.
something. I mean, also when you play guitar, no, you do things
And you
which you
know,
don't.
because I know that in the last interview, you revealed that you actually used to take classical guitar lessons.
Yes, exactly. So you have this feeling. You don't think anymore about what you do. That's the advantage of the harmony. Whereas in the counterpoint, that's also why it's important to write down and not just play, to write down what you want to compose, because that's very, then you have to be really critical and correct. Yeah.
Now, you have another example, I think. Wait, hold on a second. Let's just go to this slide. Okay.
Yeah, also, exactly. This is the last of the 20 rules in this 1754, which are in this manuscript, early manuscript. And the other aspect, which is also important when we play Partimenti, is to choose a character, to choose a kind of what do I want to say. And I found here quite nice dramatic C minor. I just play a few bars. So you can do something
Awesome.
dramatic, and also you can. I mean, you can leave the breaks, but you can also imitate what you do in the bass before. So you can use imitation was very important. We will see in Durante in Paisiello's Partimenti, he really writes it out when he wants imitation.
Oh, so that's I have a question now. When you say you can do this, you can do that. Now, sometimes it's a bit difficult because they don't leave the realizations.
Yes.
But they do leave rules. I mean, they leave the rules, but do you have to look at maybe like his toccatas or the music of that period to sort of inform what you can and cannot do?
Absolutely. I think there is still too less work between the written pieces which we have from these composers and the partimenti. We look always at the partimenti, we look maybe at intabolatura, but the written works give a lot of information too. But you used something now. We have not much written examples, and still we have some. I will talk about it later. But for example, in this case, you have imitation is one thing which was very usual. You see in the second at the end of the first line, it starts tira tam pam. So when you can play isorhythmic, same rhythm, or on the on in the break you can imitate the tira tam pam para tira tam pam. You come in the right hand with the figure which comes in the bass. That's
Mm.
also possible. Paisiello is quite clean in his intentions. He writes imitation where he wants imitation. We will see that in a later example.
That's brilliant.
And
Okay,
now
yeah. So
I think
this.
that was quite a good example, because the next chapter, I dedicated one whole chapter to Partimento realizations from the 18th century. But
Okay.
before we go to that, I would like to read this beautiful quotation,
Okay.
because everyone who spent time with Partimenti had a point where he wanted to give up because it's so difficult. And what was very nice, if you look at
Is it this? Is it this here, this paragraph?
the copyist, Giustino de Santi, the priest, before he starts with a rule, so first he shows you how to tune the harpsichord, then he has the basic things of music, and before he goes on with the rules and partimenti diminuiti of Durante, he writes this beautiful text. Listen. Here follow the principles for playing the harpsichord or the organ. These are principles that require more attention in order to learn and comprehend them well. You can use the next slide if you want.
Okay.
If my
Oh,
English.
I see. Here's the translation. Okay.
Oh, reader, you have to be sure of what I'm telling you now, that however great the confusion might be, and however much it might encumber your mind, be sure and more than sure that time will remove all confusion and all tedium, and you will take pleasure in these exercises. Do not humble yourself by abandoning such a noble, innocent pleasure. Confusion ensues when engaging with all sorts of principles and in anyone who wishes to study them. But as I just said, as time progresses, what seems difficult to understand and boring will, in the course of your study, begin to seem not just easy, but extremely easy and delightful. And at the end, I wish to remind you of a very sad adage: a soul that is willing, ready, and resolute to learn any art or science with constancy will never find difficult the energies that it needs, nor will it interrupt the studies it has begun. On the contrary, from day to day, its desire and love of studying will increase. So this is
Live happily.
really,
Wait, that's absolutely beautiful. And this is a priest?
this is a priest, musician,
Mm,
organist who took really his eager to learn. He went around 5 years to Venice, then he came to Naples to learn. And he knows, I'm sure he copied this. He says in the beginning, per I suoi familiari, he copies this for his musical friends. He wanted to share the way of learning partimenti, learning how to play harpsichord. He wanted to share that with his musical friends. And I find this fascinating because, and this is one really important point, learning harpsichord playing meant not learning pieces like we do today. It meant learning the basics, learning rule of the octave, learning moti del basso, partimenti numerati and diminuiti and intavolatura. That means learning to play harpsichord.
hmm.
So it's a completely different approach.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Beautiful, so beautiful.
yeah.
I actually, you know what? It's funny. I remember in the previous interview, and I don't know if where this quote came from, but you gave another quote that was very funny, and I can't remember where it came from. But you said something about if a student is not willing to take the pain of so where did that quote come from?
That's also in my book. That's Francesco Recupero. A bit later, 1813, he calls himself also Napoletano to show that was like a brand, like, yeah, I'm from Naples. And he wrote also a collection of partimenti.
Mm.
And at the end of one part, he says, okay, now comes the intavolatura, which means examples. I will show some. For those who don't want to take the pain of learning this whole stuff, you just play music and you learn something. So, yeah, recupero. Yeah.
That's a great quote. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, beautiful quote by De Santi, and let's progress now. I think after that quote, you have a slide which I think is a diminuiti.
Yes. Now, the next chapter after this 20 regole, which I showed now, of Durante, are the partimenti diminuiti. What you said before will come in the next slide.
Mm.
So we have some examples of realizations from the 18th century. And I will make some publicity for Peter van Toor's main editor. I have two examples. One is the Gallipoli manuscript. Here you can see,
Hmm.
which he
I
published.
have a
And
copy somewhere here.
yeah, exactly. And this is the Vasella manuscript, which I was the editor.
Yeah, I have the Gallipoli. I haven't bought the Vasella. That's yours, right? You have the.
I can send it to you
No, I'm
if
gonna
you
buy
want.
it. But yeah, tell me about these two manuscripts.
So now the Gallipoli is very important because the Partimento, which we saw before,
Okay, let
I
me
will
just
show
bring
you.
it back up.
Yes, you can go on to the next slide.
Oh, there's
The
just
Gallipoli.
a nice picture of a chapel here,
Yes,
and then
exactly. That's the library of Gallipoli.
okay, and then
It's in Apulian, and we have Giuseppe Chiriatti studied with Durante in the 50s, 1750s in Naples. So this is one, let's say, first-hand example, and he wrote out a number of partimenti, and I will play for you. If you can go back to the example.
is it this?
Yes, you see, what are diminuiti? Diminuiti means we have a partimento, and before the partimento, there are always two or three or one example on how to solve, how to play. There are some musical ideas of how to play different sections from that partimento. So that these are from Durante, the ideas, the modi. He suggests the following. This is one suggestion. Now for later, this is the second suggestion. This is particularly nice because it gives you, through the leads, it gives you the impression of more voices. You have
Hmm.
upper voices and then you have middle voices. Okay, now I will play what his pupil Giuseppe Chiriatti did with this Partimento. This is a very lovely piece, I find, and you could see he doesn't take actually the suggestions. I mean, in the second one he
Hmm.
takes, but the first one he has different ideas.
So is what level would you say Kiriati was at? Was he would you say he's intermediate or advanced?
I think for his time, I'm sure he was advanced, but it's a writing in two parts mostly. A third sometimes comes a third voice, but he was maestro di cappella. I don't know for what purpose he wrote these pieces. Maybe also for, I could imagine, for teaching purpose, as models for his pupils.
Okay.
We have the title page, unfortunately, is lost, and we don't know. We have not more information on this.
So moving on now we have now it's interesting. I recently interviewed Professor Peter Van Toor, and we talked about Durante versus Leo in terms of counterpoint instruction. He mentioned there were not really that many fugues by Durante, but this is very interesting. In our next slide, I see here there's the realization of a fugue, right, in E minor. Let's take a look at this one. This is very interesting.
Yes. This is from the Vesela manuscript, which is in Rome. And this actually is nowhere written that it's a Partimento, but we have this fugue we find in 6 sources of Partimenti. And in this case, it's written out. But it's a typical Partimento of fugues in 2 parts mostly. And you have the voices and the answers, which it's like putting pieces over each other and turning them. You have a chromatic line, which is a secondo soggetto, which asks for a chromatic accompaniment. I will play a few bars from this fugue, which is by Durante, and we don't know who made the realization, but it's an 18th century realization. Yes, this is quite interesting. There are very beautiful fugues by Durante for harpsichord. So it's quite strange not to have more fugues by him. I'm not so convinced. It's not, yeah. But the interesting thing is that the only fugue in Paisiello, coming back to Paisiello, we have one single fugue in the whole print, and the theme is very similar. It's in D major. But so you hear. Here you see he asks explicitly for imitation. Yeah. So this is
they're quite similar, I have to say.
Yes, the beginning is, and here it's very, very funny to have it. And it's in Paisiello's case is really the only one we have.
Right. Okay, so now you mentioned the Vesela manuscript. Here's another slide here. Is this what is this? Is this in tablatura?
I just want to show that as I said before, there are pieces in the Vesela manuscript by Leo, by Durante, by Filippo V, Cedronio, but we have not much information. We could identify for sure as Partimenti this fugue and another fugue also, and Perfidia, which I wrote about. What is interesting is that some of these pieces are intavolature. Some come in other manuscripts, and this particular one, I just play a few bars, is for crossing hands. I think that was also an issue to teach. So the intavolature were to teach different skills. to learn that. But there are many other pieces which I'm sure were interesting to just to learn how to play.
That's
One other
fantastic.
example is just a short thing because we spoke about the connection. One example from the Vesela is the beginning of a solfeggio. Here it is a piece by Durante. It's a sonata, number 14, but it starts exactly like a solfeggio in three other sources. I just play the beginning. So the beginning, the first 3-4 bars are identical to solfeggi.
I want to get this manuscript. That sounds like a good idea. Okay, so I think okay, there's just a couple more, and this is interesting. We go back to Paisiello now and talk about his E flat major from the Regole, the E flat major Partimento. Here it is here, and
Exactly. So one thing which is important when I so my book is not a method on how to teach Partimento because we don't have so much information, and I wanted, my aim was to take the whole context with me. And one important issue for this piece is that we have lots of genres, lots of like concerto, symphony, which were really usual in that time. And we can find them clearly in the music of Partimenti. So Partimenti are not a self content. It's not a self-content genre, not at all. It serves to teach you to compose in small scale, to teach you to play well. And one thing is, when you play a partimento, you decide, what do I want? Is it a adagio? Is it an aria, or rather a concerto? And in the case of this E flat major, it's more, I think, a concerto. So you have this whole style of tutti, of big orchestra where you play it. You have to have an idea of what it can be.
it's
This
very nice what you said that it's not self-contained, that it's just doing the Partimento is just a Partimento activity. It's supposed to lead you to actual practical outcomes and to train you in certain very real
and
things to compose.
this is from the appendix. I mean, half of my book is text and showing the connections between the conservatories, between the Regole. I explain a lot the Regole, how the yes, what is important in basic training to learn to play the Partimenti, the connection to Durante. But the second half of the book is the appendix, and there is also realizations, suggestions like this one which you saw. These are suggestions by me, and there is a catalog with all the partimenti. There is a catalog of all the disposizioni, and for the first time there is a translation, an English translation of the whole regole. So the
Wow.
So you have in the appendix the Regole of Paisiello translated in English.
Oh, wow.
If somebody is interested to read them, it's the best way
It's the best.
to buy the book.
Okay.
Now,
So there's wait, hold on a second. So we finished that. There's I see there's a couple more partimenti that we have on the slides. This one here.
exactly. I just pick out some issues. You remember I showed 5656. If you look in the second bar, so it's again this movement going up. I decided again more for a sinfonia or concerto, and he asks again later. You can see here imitazione
Hmm.
in the second line. Yes, exactly. He wants imitation. I will play a few bars to show what I can do in a more diminutive way with a 5/6 formula, which we heard before in different ways. So
Woo!
I yes, it's just it's this piece lives from the complementary rhythms. Actually, you have ta 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 tira ta ta tam, and then you answer the same way. Important is when if you see the second line, when the movement stops, Bob Gerdingen calls that interesting and boring parts.
Mm.
Movement stops, you have to go on with the movement. I mean, you move from cadenza to cadenza, from cadence to cadence, but you don't stop like here. And then you are in C major and go on. I mean, that's one aspect which is important when one realizes partimenti.
Now, wait, Nicoleta, you studied with Professor Rudolf Lutz. You studied with
Yeah.
Professor Enrico Baiano.
Yes.
If somebody, I mean, that was incredible. If somebody wanted to be like you, I mean, maybe not as good as you, but just to be better at partimental realization, do you have to get a teacher, or can you kind of self-teach yourself? What advice do you have to just get better at this and these sorts of realizations? I mean, it's obviously going to take some time.
Yes, I think it's in my opinion. I mean, I'm very impressed and happy to see how many people are interested. I mean, look at your podcast. When we did the interview some 2 years ago, there was half as many interested people. No, now you have so
Yes.
many subscribers. Yes, so is there. I would advise everyone to go um, on two paths at the same time. One is the Partimento and one is study of composition. If you read, every composer, every musician of the 18th century studied a lot other composers. And I learned a lot, of course, by Durante. I work a lot with Durante's Partimenti. I found everything very helpful also for Paisiello, although it's a different musical language. But at the same time, and that's what I show also in my book, I show a lot of examples from compositions of Paisiello. We have a lot of symphonies, concerti, where we find solutions for his partimenti. So never stop just doing these exercises, which are important. Also look at the music. One example, if you don't want to do Paisiello because it's late, if you prefer a more early composer, that's, by the way, my next project, is Alessandro Scarlatti. He has a huge number of partimenti and they are so beautiful and good. So I just decided, I mean, I did a CD only with Partimenti, but or mostly with Partimenti. The next one will show actually music of Scarlatti and his Partimenti, to show this strong connection. I mean, it's not that we Partimenti were just yeah, it belonged to everything.
Now,
I
okay, so there's a question I have for with regard to doing the partimento. Now, for instance, how many times should you do this partimento before you really think you get the most out of it? Like, so when you see this, like
I have
how many variations would you do? Would you make a student do?
I have two ways of doing it. I write a lot out because I think that's also what was done. They wrote on donkey.
The cartella, is it?
Exactly, yeah, and deleted because they had no paper. But I learned a lot. Of course, I like to play, and I play for myself a lot through them. But I never reached searching perfection the same which I reach when I write out. So I suggest to everyone to write out, because there you then you have to be accurate. You cannot do mistakes, but also to play. So, and the other thing is, sometimes I have good ideas and then I just lose them. They just go. And yeah, depends also a bit of, yeah, many things. But I would try a lot to write also. By one thing is to play a lot, but also to try to write out.
I have a question on, because you talked about getting good ideas. Sometimes, Nicoleta, do you like to just do free improvisation? Like just say, I want to just take a pattern and play with it and just mix things
Yes,
around. Like, what
I,
can you just talk a little bit about free improvisation?
yeah, I like also in that case. For example, I wanted to improvise a prelude in the style of Handel, and then I think again of harmonic structure. I think of what modulations do I need? How do I get these modulations? But also there, I like to look at examples and see what I can do. Um, I think most for in my case, I learned a lot by trying also to change the music which I see, because if you looked at these easy pieces by Paisiello, I transformed them in more complex pieces, and that's what I will do next time. And we cannot repeat things by playing the same, and that's also part of, it's not free improvisation, but it's changing, varying what we have. But free improvisation, of course, it's part of it. I just I'm doing too much partimenti. Free improvisation much
Okay,
more.
so we are almost at the end. There's another little example here from the Regole.
Yes, this is not in my book, but it has quite a lot of interesting issues which I want to point out for those who play. Um, this has a lot of numbers. It has andante, so it gives you the idea of the character of the piece. It's in C minor, so it has a lot of numbers which are not really harmonically. They show the melody. That's often in Paisiello's case, that you have the melodic
Hmm.
line in the numbers. It's also the harmony, but often the melodic line. For example, no one would write 635 and then 367. I mean, it's a clearly melodic way,
Hmm.
and that you have to embellish. For example, that's one thing. Then again, you have very long notes. It rings the bells. Again, you have just the structure which you have to feel. If you look at the third line, can you see there exactly? You have these fast notes, and then suddenly it stops, and you have the long notes.
Mm.
So you have to continue the movement. You have this third.
Woo!
So
Woo!
the movement goes on, and then again a part where you have just 3 and 4 and 6. Again, numbers. Same 1 octave lower.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Something like that.
That is awesome. That is so
So
cool.
he shows you, I mean, he writes 358765. It's like a phone number. He really writes you what he wants you to play. But the best for me, my example is this when you have the triplets and then the movement stops. You either play triplets or you continue, you become even more faster. So you have then 7, 6, 8 in the left hand, 8, 6, 5, 3, and play in the right hand the ornament. Typical ending of Paisiello's works. Diminution. So these are also ideas from his work. This yam ta da pam 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 pam.
I forgot to ask you, Nicoleta. Now, Paisiello, we know Cimarosa had a ton of piano sonatas or
Yes.
keyboard sonatas. Did Paisiello publish solo keyboard works?
I mean, this Raccolta, which you saw in the beginning,
Yep.
this collection of music is with violin ad libitum. It's mostly, there are rondos. This is, it was very much published at the end of the 18th century. The
Mm.
partenza was a lot in England. In our times, not. Then he composed piano concertos, 6 or 8, I think.
Oh,
There
wow.
are concertos for also not very difficult. That's why people labeled him a bit like uninteresting. But I think the problem was, if we look at the Partimenti and see how difficult they were, he composed keyboard music not for to publish for a large audience. He composed for his noble boss, who asked him, "Okay,
Right.
I would like to have some nice music from you," and he probably thought, "Okay, it can't be very difficult." And I could imagine that somebody, most of the music of that time was composed, which was printed, was either for large mass which had not the possibility to have a good education,
Mm.
so they had to be able to play it at home. And the next example we see, it's something like that. I mean, you see, you look at something
Is this
and
the Preludio?
okay, this is a small example from the book, from the appendix. You see what Paisiello wrote. That's the upper part. Now, if you look at that, it's very simple. You can do something more elaborated. I mean, I did a variant on the second stave.
And so that was a variation you wrote based off the original Preludio.
Exactly. I did some inversions because the preludio is just, it looks to me just like skeleton, like
Mm.
something to be elaborating. And a lot of music is like that somehow. A lot of Paisiello. In my book, I also wrote variations for a rondo, but I thought that's for those who buy the book interesting. And I would like to show another piece which I did a lot of variations by a composer which I discovered recently. Also, I mean, he was a bit younger than Paisiello, but again, a lot of this music was written very, very thin. And I feel somehow it's unfair not to play the music. But by learning Partimento, it means we know what to do with such a writing. And I'm sure that somebody who was skillful like Paisiello, he would have done much more things than what he wrote for his noble ladies
Yes.
who were not very good players, maybe. But let's go to Pier Giuseppe Sandoni.
Is here's a picture of him. There we go.
Yes, yes. He was the assistant of Handel in London.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes, he was 10 years. He left Bologna. He was 4 times Principe in the Accademia Filarmonica. He was very known at his time. And he's now very known because of his wife, Francesca Cuzzoni. She was one of the prima donnas of Handel. She was his wife. But he was the first who published sonatas in England in 1727
Hmm.
and harpsichord sonatas, and he was a very sought after singing teacher and and harpsichord teacher. Now,
Wow.
the great thing which I discovered, and I'm really proud of it, Bach knew him, Johann Sebastian Bach, in 1720 when he wrote the Klavierbüchlein for his eldest son, Wilhelm Friedemann Bach. He copied two pieces by Sandoni. And I discovered those pieces. One is just a fragment in Bach's manuscript. I discovered those pieces in Cardiff in the Macworth collection. And if you go back to my homepage, you can see my article about these two pieces is out in the Bach Jahrbuch exactly. Yeah, you can
Is it
see the
in
Bach.
public? Is it in publications?
No, go back to the other.
Let's go
It's on
back.
the front page. Yeah,
Oh, so
you see
it's right here. Okay.
Jahrbuch. It comes out in 2 weeks. I think it will be out.
Wow.
And I discovered some ways how Bach might have come in contact with Sandoni's music. There were quite a lot of Italian musicians in the surrounding of Bach, which knew Sandoni, and one was the castrato Berenstadt. He owned Sandoni's sonatas in
Wait a
Dresden.
second.
So
Okay, wait. This is wow. So this who is wait, let's say this again. So
no, I'm
Sandoni, he like you said he was the assistant, but what was his training? He's Italian, so
He's
uh
Italian, he's Bolognese composer. I'm sorry
okay.
to bring now to leave Naples,
No,
and
this is huge. I didn't know. That's awesome. That sounds like a and
um,
we actually have first of all this is your recording. I think we should share this here. This beautiful
yes,
recording that you did. It's
yes,
available for people to check out. And we have what is this? 6 sets of lessons?
exactly. This was his second print. So Sandoni was very well established in Bologna around 1715. But Handel just opened his Royal Music Academy, which was his orchestra, his famous orchestra. So he hired Sandoni as his assistant and harpsichordist.
Wow. So he must have been a good harpsichord player.
Was extremely good, and he was I don't know, he must have had a quite difficult character. Here you will find a lot of gossip. Yeah, some in my booklet I wrote some things down which I found there. You can find, I couldn't find much about Durante, but about Sandoni you will find a lot of gossip. I mean, Handel hired him to go to Venice and bring the prima donna Francesca Cuzzoni, and by the time they reached England it took months and she was already pregnant, which was quite a scandal at the time. So all these kind of things.
Oh.
But nevertheless, he wrote a lot of music,
Yeah.
which unfortunately is lost. I mean, we have no opera surviving by him. We have all the libretti, but no opera. But I found in England, where he lived quite a long time, I found cantatas and instrumental music. Now, if you look at this Chacona, this he published 3 years before he died. He was not in London, and I could imagine he had no possibility to look at the music before it was published.
Okay.
He probably they did something. Now, if you see, it's just so you have everything repeated,
Mm.
everything just the same. And I don't, what I did, I took this music and tried to make so many changes as possible. So I will not play all, but first of all, I was thinking, if you repeat something and you have a nice melodic line, you have to answer somehow to this melodic line. That's one thing. Then you see a third voice only in the cadence. It can't be that you have a third voice only in the cadence. So I added, but for me, variation doesn't mean embellishment. It means really adding voices and thinking counterpoints.
Hmm.
Like in the Partimento, that means variation. So I show you what I did with, I play a few variations. And so on. And this you go on until he modulates. If you turn the next page,
Okay.
again you see there the up. It starts up with one voice. So after this, he comes a part in in A minor, where I put the arrow, and it's also again no harmony. And so on. It's a bit, it's thin somehow. What I did is I added again voices and harmonies. And now we are in C major. This is one again, changing you. Somehow it's like he gives you an idea, but if you don't develop the idea, it's just poor. Like the next one. So what we often have in this case in the partimenti, we have a 3 or a 6, and we know, okay, I have an inner voice which goes parallel. And so on.
It's fair to say, right, Nicoleta, that somebody, especially a virtuoso keyboardist like Sandoni, I mean, if he had been studying, I guess if he's Bolognese, that tradition, Martini, Mattei, he would have definitely known how to do what you've just done. And this is, it's like a big question mark, right? He leaves it. You'll have to investigate to really understand that he could do this, but it's not really revealed by the score.
Yes, and that's the point. I'm sure most of this music which is printed, and we look at it and immediately say he was a bad composer. It's not true, because it was printed for the large public. No, I mean, people who could not have afforded to have education, but want to play at home for their own pleasure, so-called dilettanti. So for them, this is doable. But of course, if you go in the end of the piece and you see there on the last page, on the next page, we come back to the exactly. You see, he has to come back to A major. So this kind of imitation you learn in composition, and Sandoni was a very well-trained composer. Can you go to the previous
Oh,
page?
okay.
Now, when you see the arrow, it's you have this section. Just a second. Um, you see here after this first bar, and then now this is clearly a place where you do imitation. You do either before imitation or you can do it in anticipation or after the bass line. In the repetition, I will do in anticipation. So you do either.
Wow. That is awesome.
Changing of voices, or changing arpeggi, or adding voices. I mean, if you see something like this up of the page, that's fine, but something is missing. I added harmony and with
Yeah.
suspension.
Right, right.
So this is what one can do. So this is another way of using partimenti in the practice. You use them as the skills which you learned in partimenti. You can translate in poorly written music, and you can stop judging composers being bad, because he was really, I mean, yeah, he was 4 times the head of the Accademia Filarmonica. I mean, that was one of the most impressive clubs for musicians. It was quite an honor to be the principe of the Accademia. So he was really appreciated as a composer.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think that's a good to end. That's a very insightful thing of what you just said, especially the historical context of how we judge people in the past. We don't have much to go on if we don't investigate the background, their training, Partimento. Because, like you said, if we just take the keyboard works that are published for, perhaps you could say, dilettantes, right? Amateurs. You could make a very short-sighted judgment call on somebody who might be an amazing. I mean, if we could go back in time and see this head of the institution, he must have been amazing. I mean, if you actually got to hear him improvise and play, and
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that was my first statement in the book, and what I showed. We have this Raccolta 1783, which is very simple pieces like the partenza, nice melodies, nice transcriptions of opera arias by Paisiello. So pieces which have a really low level. Today, when a publisher sees that, he said, okay, it's for beginners. And at the same time, he published the Partimenti, which are really difficult. I mean, the first ones maybe are easy, but Paisiello's Partimenti are really short pieces of art and very well done, very high quality.
yes, yes, that's. I think we should end back to the main topic of the interview, the Partimenti of Paisiello. Can you give an assessment? You just said a little something which I found very interesting. Give an assessment of the quality of his Partimenti. Maybe you could help me compare them with like the later books of Fenaroli, Durante. I know his Partimenti, also the more serious ones, are also considered to be quite virtuosic. Um, can you give me an assessment of Paisiello's Partimenti?
Paisiello's Partimenti are really artful in the sense that they are written by somebody who was a very good composer. I mean, we can see that he was not constrained to teach ever in a conservatory. He was not under the pressure of delivering a lot and fast. I the fact that he printed this collection must have been for him also a great honor. I'm sure it's dedicated to his pupil Maria Fyodorovna, which we heard he appreciated a lot. Probably it was sponsored by her. That was definitely the case, but it's really high quality of composition, and it's, as I said, it's not it's the language of Paisiello, the language of his orchestral pieces, and it's a great contrast to the keyboard pieces from him which we have from that time. And that's why I stand for these musicians. When we see keyboard pieces which are not difficult, to label them immediately, okay, this is not a good composer, like Sandoni. This is just two voices and nothing there. It's not the case. They improvised very well and they knew what they do.
I guess that's like judging a jazz musician on a lead sheet, right? It's just like if you if you take a lead sheet and say, "Oh, Bud Powell plays April in Paris," or Get Happy, or any kind of song, and or Sweet Georgia Brown, and then you just say the lead sheet. The lead sheet is just a simple melody and some chord symbols, and you say Bud Powell is terrible, but it's we were but it's the I guess it's the same for Sandoni and Paisiello. You can't
And
tell. You weren't there to hear him actually play.
yeah, the one I went to a friend. He played in October in a pianist, and he said, "Oh, I could do 600 things on this lead sheet." The way, I mean, variating, changing, it's the way they learn, and also it's our task as musicians. I think today, I see this like not obligation, but I see it as yeah. I want that young people are aware that what is printed in the 19th or late 18th century, like the sonatas by Mozart, which were, or Haydn, which were really well curated and whatsoever, what is printed before was a different story. I mean, and they have to have a general look at the music to understand how to play partimenti, but to understand also how to perform the music of the time.
Now, to end, I guess my final question is, you said that Paisiello was a great composer of his actual published works, stuff that where he actually published them, and you can see the extent of his skill. Is it his operas, or is it his instrumental works? Where can we find uh, stuff that we can actually that's written down, that we can see him at his full majesty, so to speak?
We have mostly printed, and I gave some examples of his operas. I mean, if you look, for example, a Partimento in the concerto style or symphony, you can look at several symphonies of Paisiello and you see the style. I did some analysis. I think mainly opera was the most important, opera or cantatas also, but opera was the most important genre which everyone dreamed to be a
Right.
good composer. And from those music, from those scores, we can learn a lot. And then, of course, we have great composers where we can see also other aspects like Domenico Scarlatti or Alessandro Scarlatti, which wrote a lot down again for their for the capable employers, which they had, like Scarlatti, for example. Um, we have to somehow look at the music to understand how to perform better. I think that's the major thing which I show also in my book. I look at different compositions and try to bring them together. Um, I hope this was the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And what can I say, Nicoleta? It's been really a fantastic time. I think this might be greater than our first interview. Our first interview was awesome, but this has been really fantastic. I mean, the slides and the playing has been tremendous. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You've
Thank you.
really excited me about this book, but not only this book, also, please, by the way, I want to mention the Partimenti of Giovanni Paisiello. You've even got me excited about your Alessandro Scarlatti project. I mean, that's
Yes,
going to be epic too. And the Bach one, Connections with Sandoni. So I think you're somebody I'm going to keep following. I'm a fan. And thank you so much for your incredible research and your playing and your albums. Professor Nicoleta Paraschivescu, thank you for being on the show. I will talk to you soon. Bye bye.
yes. Bye. Bye.